In May 1971, DuPont Chemical Company began production at its Fayetteville Works plant. The plant sits on the Cape Fear River, which also serves as the primary source of drinking water for multiple North Carolina counties. Presently, the Fayetteville Works Chemours site produces fluoropolymers like Gen X and other intermediates used in the production of Teflon and other chemical products. Because newly manufactured Teflon tends to clump, DuPont augmented its Teflon with another chemical, PFOA, which acts as a smoothing agent. Eventually, DuPont settled multiple class action lawsuits, including a lawsuit filed by the EPA for over $700 million after researchers proved the link between PFOA exposure and multiple diseases and birth defects. Chemours began producing Gen X as a manufactured product in 2009 as a replacement for PFOA. In January of that year, the EPA entered into a consent order with DuPont, which required the company to recover and capture or recycle 99% of substances related to Gen X. In November 2016, Dr. Detlef Knappe of NC State University published a paper showing that the mean concentration of Gen X downstream of the Fayetteville Works plant was 631 parts per trillion, well above the EPA's advisory level of 140 parts per trillion. Concerned North Carolina citizens and regulators wondered how Gen X could be found at such high concentrations following the 2009 consent order to destroy 99% of substances related to Gen X. In response, Chemours clarified that Gen X is also a byproduct of other manufacturing processes that have been in place at the Fayetteville Works plant since 1980, and Gen X has been discharged since then. This discharge was allowable due to an exemption in the consent order which excluded substances produced as byproducts of other processes without separate commercial intent. Because the Gen X created as a byproduct was not produced to be sold commercially, it remained unregulated and could be legally discharged as a byproduct. I spoke with Dr. Knappe, whose team uncovered the high Gen X concentrations. Dr. Knappe identified the greatest failure in this case being Chemours' focus solely on what was legal instead of what was ethical. If you have two processes, one producing Gen X for commercial reasons and the other producing it as a known byproduct, why is wastewater from the former sequestered and removed from the site, while wastewater from the latter is discharged into the Cape Fear River? This was a lapse not only by Chemours, but also by the EPA in creating such a loophole in this consent order. Chemours' actions were not necessarily unethical on the grounds that Gen X is dangerous, since its human health effects are still widely unstudied. Instead, the unethical behavior stems from the release of Gen X into the Cape Fear River under the consent order. The form of the chemical, whether commercial product or byproduct, should not matter. The most stringent standards for a chemical should apply to all forms of it. After the news of the Gen X release broke, Knappe was able to participate in the community response, speaking at public forums in mid-2017 and onwards. Knappe said that the community was initially and rightfully angry with Chemours. In a sense, the situation is a lose-lose. The options are not in the community's favor. They can let Chemours pollute and keep the jobs created by the company, or stop Chemours from polluting and potentially lose local jobs if Chemours moves. Some of the community's anger was also directed towards the utilities, because even an advanced treatment plant could not remove Gen X from the water. Trust in the utility was lost to an extent because the utility didn't communicate well with the public. When communities ask, is the water safe? The answer should not be, well, we meet all the regulations. I most appreciated Dr. Knappe's insights with regards to communication and collaboration. He underscored the importance of partnering with non-scientists to communicate effectively with the public and address their questions and fears about the release of industrial emerging contaminants. Another important aspect of public communication is creating opportunities to build trust. If the only interaction between the community and the utility is paying the water bills, trust will not be strong enough to withstand something like the Gen X issue. Facilitating dialogue between utilities and the community will help residents feel invested in the utility, as well as making the utility feel invested in the community. Empathy begins when you put a face on the other. The unregulated release of Gen X into the Cape Fear River was an unethical act that could have been prevented had major stakeholders chosen paths that consider the impact on people, not on their pocketbook. Both industry and regulatory agencies are at fault in their temperate attitudes toward the release of potentially harmful chemicals into a drinking water source. As to what we can do, Positive changes to social and economic justice issues can be achieved when researchers are curious and courageous in pursuing answers to questions that pertain to the protection of the public welfare. So press on in your work.